Well, welcome everyone to Straight Science. Again, we are a science presentation series put on by UAF Northwest Campus here in Nome, and also UAF Alaska Sea Grant in the home office. And we are both public servants for the Bering Strait region, and we serve the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Yupik, Inupiaq, and St. Lawrence Island Yupik peoples. Now, kind of interesting, we have this little hack, what do you call it, a Zoom bomb, not a hacker, a Zoom bomb thing going on. So I will be trying to handle that. If for some reason somebody sneaks in and does their business, well then give us a moment and we'll get rid of them. And then Sabrina is our speaker tonight. Sabrina Garcia is she's a shark person, so she's fairly unflappable. So she will continue on, and we will pause to get rid of the noise. And it's making me learn some new buttons really fast, so I appreciate the whole thing. So tonight's speaker, and it's going to be a great one, is Sabrina Garcia, and she is with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's Division of Commercial Fisheries. Mm-hmm. And she's in Anchorage, and she's been studying the lives of salmon and salmon sharks. So those are both things that I never thought we'd actually do a straight science on sharks. And here we are. So I think it's a sign of the times, and we're really excited. People have been seeing sharks, and it's an unknown to me. So everything I'll be learning. So again, let's jump in and take it away, Sabrina Garcia. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the introduction, Gay, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about one of my favorite things in the world, which is sharks. So hopefully by the end of this talk, I will lure everybody to the shark side. So like Gay said, my name is Sabrina Garcia, and I am a biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Gay, can you still see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let's see if it wants to go.
If not, you can reload if you want to stop share and
yeah,
fire it up again that way.
Yeah, I have to do a quick stop share here.
Okay.
Can you see my slide there?
Yep, we've got you. Yep, we have it right on there, the opening slide.
All right, let's see if it'll.
Is it hung up with the video or?
Nope, there's no video on this one. I wonder if I'll just slide this over. Let's see if that'll.
We got a nice presentation mode.
Yeah, I see it there, but it doesn't let me click forward.
And thank you everybody for your patience. So this was working perfectly before you came.
Of course.
And of course, there you go. We're a patient bunch.
Sorry, everyone.
No worries. Sort of a presenter's nightmare. It was all good, and then the camera starts and.
Yep. Let's see. Let's try that and see if we can get that to go. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, thanks everyone. Sorry about that. So I'm here to talk to you today about the salmon shark. And the salmon shark, which is shown in that photo in the bottom left, is a widely distributed predator found in the coastal and oceanic waters of the North Pacific. So in this map here on the bottom right, you can see all these areas in red, and that's the distribution of the salmon shark. So if you follow my cursor, they go down as far as Japan, up into the Gulf of, the Sea of Okhotsk, into the Bering Sea, and then down into California. These sharks can live up to 25 years of age, and they typically reach lengths of up to 6 to 7 feet. So one of the questions that I always get about salmon sharks is, why should we care about salmon sharks? We have a really bad habit of not caring about things unless we commercially fish for them or they're part of recreational fisheries. But I just want to share some reasons why I think we should all care about salmon sharks. So one of the big things is that we don't really know much about their population abundance. And these sharks are caught as bycatch in commercial fisheries, and they're also targeted in sport fisheries in South Central and Southeastern Alaska. So this is a photo. You can see a big trawl net here and a crew member here. And this is just one of the sharks that they've caught in their trawl net, unfortunately. These sharks are apex predators, and like all sharks, when we think of sharks, we think of these salmon sharks and white sharks, and they're the top of the food chain, and they tend to eat things that we care about, things like pollock and salmon. And so when we're thinking about sharks and these predators, and we want to know things like, when are they running into these species that we really do care about, we need to know when and where these sharks overlap with these prey items that we care about to quantify or to know how much these sharks are eating these things that we care about. But then we also need to have a baseline of these sharks and their populations and their distributions to know what effects things like climate change might have on their populations. So one of the things that I ask myself are these sharks, these salmon sharks, are they moving into waters farther north, maybe into the Arctic, or have they always been there and we just didn't know, and we just didn't have ways to report these observations? And another thing that I think about when I think about salmon sharks are, will other species start moving into Alaskan waters as waters get warmer and warmer? So salmon sharks are pretty unique. They are endothermic, so I call them warm-blooded sharks. And this is a trait that's shared among salmon sharks and the other members of the lamnid family that they're a part of. So I put all the members of the lamnid family here. The white shark, pretty identifiable. Our salmon shark here, the poor beagle shark, which is basically the Atlantic version of the salmon shark, and then the 2 species of mako sharks. So these sharks have the ability to maintain their internal body temperature higher than the temperature of the water that's around them. So this is unique to this family of sharks. And if you've heard, tuna fish species also have the same ability to do that. And so because these sharks are warm-blooded and they're able to keep their internal body temperature higher than that of the surrounding water, salmon sharks are able to venture into these really cold Alaskan waters, and they tend to go farther north and deeper than white sharks and mako sharks. And because of their warm-bloodedness, they're also pretty high energy sharks. This photo here on the right is a salmon shark jumping out of the water with what looks like a pink salmon in its mouth. And I wanted to show this figure here on the left. So this is a bunch of tag data. There was a big program that was run by Stanford University, and they put out hundreds of tags on salmon sharks and white sharks and mako sharks. So what this is showing is salmon sharks are all these blue dots, white sharks are all these black dots, and the mako sharks are these red dots. So each of those dots represents a location that was transmitted from the satellite tags. And what you can see is that the salmon sharks, while they do cover a lot of ground, you can see that once you get about to British Columbia, we tend to only see salmon sharks up in this area. And you can see from this smaller figure here, it shows sea surface temperature here on the bottom axis, and then the number of observations. You can see that the blue, which is representative of the salmon sharks, they tend to be in colder waters than the white sharks that are shown in black and the mako sharks that are shown in red. So this ability to be, they're the best able to keep their body temperature higher than the other lamnid sharks. So that's why we think that they're able to live in these, in the subarctic and Arctic oceans. And so one of the questions that I get a lot when we talk about salmon sharks are there also great whites in Alaska? And how do I tell a great white shark apart from a salmon shark? So I thought I would just spend a quick second to just talk about the differences between a white shark and a salmon shark. So the white shark is shown here on the left. Our salmon shark is shown here on the right. And when we're thinking about distinguishing features, one of the most obvious, if you're just looking at a shark in the water, is its size. So I mentioned that salmon sharks typically get 6 to 7 feet. There are some that get larger, but if you see a shark that's larger than 3 meters, so bigger than 9.5, 10 feet, it's likely a white shark. If you're getting some underwater footage, if you're lucky enough to stick a GoPro in the water and get some underwater footage, you can see that these white sharks, they have, looks like they dipped their pectoral fins in an inkwell. So they've got these little black points here at the tip of their pectoral fins. And you can't see it very well in this picture, but they also got a bit of black behind their pectoral fins. And then what they also have is, hopefully you can see in this photo, they have this line that kind of sticks out from their body, and that's called a keel. And white sharks have a single keel. And you'll see with the salmon shark, if we jump over here, I zoomed in on a picture of their tail, and you can see that primary keel very easily. But if you look below, you can see that there's also a secondary keel, and that's unique to salmon sharks. So if there's a shark washed up on the beach and you're trying to figure out if it's a white shark or a salmon shark and you're having trouble, that secondary keel is a great way to differentiate the two species. Salmon sharks have these, really distinct spots on the bottom of their belly, and white sharks, you can see they have this almost abrupt color where with the gray on the top and the white on the bottom. And finally, the great whites, they have that color pattern runs across their face. So you can see that half their face is gray and half their face is white, whereas salmon sharks have almost an entirely gray snout. And sharks are really cool for a lot of reasons, but another reason is that you can use their teeth to identify different species. So again, if a shark washed up on the beach and all you had were some teeth to look at, you can differentiate the species by looking at their teeth. So the great whites have these really easy to identify triangular serrated teeth, and salmon sharks have kind of pointy, also triangular teeth with these little cusps on the side. So there's a few ways to tell them apart. And I wanted to talk about salmon shark diets because, when we think about salmon sharks, their name kind of makes you think that all they eat is salmon. And that's not the case. Salmon sharks are opportunists. So typically animals are specialists or they're opportunists. So when we think of a specialist, we think of something like the southern resident killer whale that typically only eat Chinook salmon, and they'll eat other stuff if they have to. But salmon sharks are opportunists, which means they're going to eat whatever they can, whatever is available to them at the time. So I just put up a few pictures of things that have been found in salmon shark stomachs. So some spiny dogfish, some Chinook salmon, of course, sablefish, some pollock, squid, herring, and even some lancet fish. So their diet is quite varied. And another thing that we've seen when we've actually gotten salmon shark stomachs is that salmon sharks, their diets, they vary or they change based on where they are, how big they are, and what time of the season you're sampling these stomachs. So I wanted to highlight these two studies, and there aren't many studies that have looked at what's inside salmon shark stomachs. So one of these studies got salmon shark stomachs from this area of the Western North Pacific by this blue box, and it sampled these sharks in April and May. And you can see that the pictures of the salmon sharks that I have on these slides, one is smaller than the other because these sharks that they had in this study were mostly subadult. So they were smaller than the sharks that I'll talk about from this study. And when they looked at what was inside those salmon shark stomachs, it was 96% squid. So not much in the way of fish, but mostly squid. And that study occurred in April and May. So we're looking at springtime for that study. And then we're going to jump across to the Eastern North Pacific, where they took some salmon shark stomachs from Prince William Sound, Alaska, here in South Central. And like I said, these were bigger fish, bigger sharks. And these sharks were sampled in July and August. And as we know, in July and August, there's lots of salmon that are coming back to Alaska. And so when they looked at these shark stomachs, 76, 3/4 of their diet was salmon. And when they looked at the species, it was typically pink salmon, chum salmon, and coho salmon. But what was interesting is that even in the middle of the salmon season in July and August, they still had 25%, or about a quarter of their diet, was stuff that wasn't salmon. So it's interesting to note that even when salmon are abundant and available, these sharks are still eating a variety of different fish and squid. And another, I have a collaborator in Oregon who's also looking at salmon shark stomachs, and she was kind enough to send me some videos of some of her research. So what she's doing is she's getting salmon sharks stomachs from salmon sharks that are caught as bycatch in some of the fisheries in the Gulf of Alaska and in Washington. And I just put a list of some of the things that she's found in the salmon shark stomach. So hake and whiting, that's the hake fishery off the Pacific Northwest, is the equivalent of the pollock fishery here in Alaska. So it's a big fishery. Unfortunately, they catch salmon sharks as bycatch. So it's no surprise that when hake and whiting are abundant, that's what's making up the majority of the salmon sharks' diet. So about 95% of what they're finding in their diets are hake and whiting. But then they've also found rockfish and Pacific tomcod, flatfish, and squid. And I just put some photos here of what she's doing. So she'll cut open the stomachs and she'll start trying to look at what's inside, taking photos, taking lengths, taking measurements and weights of what she's finding inside. And I feel like I'd be remiss if we think about salmon sharks as these apex predators, but I wanted to mention that they can also be prey. And here in Alaska, we do tend to get these offshore killer whales, and I'm sure folks have heard of the resident and the transient whales that eat fish and marine mammals, but there's also these offshore orcas that specialize in sharks. And so this is I think it's a pretty amazing photo with an orca holding a salmon shark in its mouth. So it just kind of makes you think that maybe they aren't the top predators out there. And I really wanted to talk about shark reproduction. I could do a whole chat just on the variety of ways that that sharks reproduce, and it's really interesting. Salmon sharks mature at ages 3 to 5 for the males and ages 6 to 10 for the females. And the females are believed to give birth every other year, so they take a break in between their pregnancies, and they give birth to about 4 to 5 pups. And salmon sharks are oophagous, which means that they're egg eaters. And so what this means is that what the female will do, and hopefully you can see my mouse, is that she will lay eggs. So inside these 2 egg capsules here, hopefully you can see my mouse. So it's the one on the top right and the bottom left. You can see that there's just a little blob inside. And these are the 2 fertilized embryos that if they were allowed to continue to develop would look like these guys. And they develop yolk sacs. But once they run through their yolk sacs, what the female does is she has what they're called nutritive egg capsules, and they're basically unfertilized eggs full of delicious nutrients, and these tiny little sharks will eat those while they're in the female's uterus. So it's pretty incredible to think about this form of reproduction. And here in this photo in the top left, you can just see the size of the yolk sac for these little guys. So they'll use up that yolk sac, and then they'll switch to the females, to the unfertilized eggs. And for when it comes to reproduction, one of the things that we don't know, we know lots about salmon sharks, but there's so many things that we don't know, and that's what makes it really exciting, is we don't know where the males and females meet to mate, and we also don't really know where the females give birth. So there's still lots to learn about salmon sharks. But I did want to show this picture because it's pretty interesting. So this was a female salmon shark that was caught off Nunavak Island, and she was about 7.5 feet, and she was already deceased when she came onto the boat. And when they did a necropsy, they saw that she was pregnant. And when they flipped her over, they noticed all of these marks on her fin. And what we think those are is they look like punctures. And so what we thought this was a sign of mating. So mating in sharks, it's pretty, can be pretty intense. And so sometimes the males will grab onto the females. And so this is what we think we're seeing in this photo are those mating attempts from the male. And so one of the things that we really want to know about sharks is where do they go? We see them a lot when they come to coastal Alaska waters, when they're feeding on salmon and concentrating where salmon are, but how do we know where they are throughout the year? And one of the big sources of information for us is interaction with fisheries, and mostly that's bycatch. And so, you know, while they're not the intended species, we tend to learn a lot about sharks because they're caught incidentally in these other fisheries. And that gives us a bit of information. It at least gives us a location and a season for where these sharks are in the ocean. But another way for us to know where sharks go is to tag sharks. And I've said the shark tagging a bit in this presentation, and shark tagging is just, it's a research method for us to learn about sharks. And the tag is the tool that we're using to collect the data to answer the question of where do sharks go. So one of the things that's really interesting about salmon sharks is that they are found on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. So here's Hawaii down here. We've got Alaska up here. Here's Anchorage. Some of you folks are up here in Nome. And so there's believed to be two groups of salmon sharks, those that are on the western side of the Pacific, and those sharks, we think, they migrate from Japan and they hang out in Japan in the wintertime. And then in the spring and summer, they start migrating up into the Bering Sea where they'll hang out in the summer. And then in the fall time, they'll come back to Japan. And we see a similar migration on the eastern side of the North Pacific, where we tend to see sharks here in the Gulf of Alaska and in coastal Alaska waters in the summertime. And then in the fall, they'll start going south and they'll overwinter off the coast of California. We don't have any information on, we don't have any satellite tagging information from sharks in the Western North Pacific. And we don't have any evidence that sharks that are caught in fisheries, which this concept of migration is just based on sharks that are caught in fisheries for other animals. So we don't know, we don't have satellite tagging data to back that up. And we don't know if these sharks are moving across the Pacific from the west to the east or from the east into the west. In the Eastern North Pacific, they've actually, through that program that I mentioned earlier through Stanford University, they've tagged hundreds of sharks. But the thing is that all the sharks that they've tagged were females, because salmon sharks and a lot of other shark species do this thing where the males and the females don't tend to hang out together. The females do their own thing, the males do their own thing, and then they overlap when it's time to mate. So because of this separation by sex, when they came up to Alaska to tag these sharks as part of this program, the sharks that they tagged were all females. And if you can see in this map that this is, I know it's a little bit blurry, but what I wanted you to see is that the sharks that were tagged as part of this program, they did not cross the date line. So of the hundreds of sharks that they tagged, none of them went over the date line into the Western North Pacific. What they did is what I showed in the previous slide, is that they hung out in coastal Alaska in the summer, and then fall time came and they migrated south to California for the winter. So when we talk about satellite tagging, I wanted to talk about the two tags that I use for my shark tagging research up here. So the first one are called pop-off satellite archival tags, or you might hear me say PSAT. And so what these do is they record data, and that data is depth, temperature, and light level data. And this is what they look like. And this is, this is just fixed into the dorsal fin of the shark. And so what they do is the person who's programming the tag, so myself, we tell the tag how long we want it to record data for. But there's a trade-off. If you have a tag that's going to record for a year, it's not going to be able to record as much data or as detailed data for a tag that's only going to be deployed for 3 months. So before we deploy these tags, we're asking ourselves, what is the research question? What are we really trying to figure out about these sharks when we deploy these tags? And when that time period comes up, so if we deploy the tag for 3 months, once those 3 months pass, the tag has a little corrodable wire here. And at that time period, it'll corrode and the tag will pop off the shark. It'll float to the surface and it'll transmit the data that it's collected via satellite. And then I can log on and get that data. And these, as you can see here, they're usually attached. They can either be attached through the dorsal fin, like is shown here, or as you'll see later, they can also be attached to the muscle in the shark's back. And the other type of satellite tag that I use is a satellite transmitting tag. And these are amazing. What these tags do, you can see one here on a tiger shark, is that they're attached to the shark's dorsal fin with the antenna pointing up towards the sky. And anytime that the shark's fin comes out of the water, there's a sensor on the tag that tells the tag you're out of the water, and that'll tell the tag to send a location. Now, because the shark has to be at the surface to send a location, these types of tags are only useful for sharks that come to the surface very frequently. And luckily for us, salmon sharks spend a lot of time at the surface. And these tags can last up to 3 years. So you can get a lot of data, which is great. And some of these tags have been, the technology with satellite tagging, every year it gets better and better. And some of these tags, in addition to collecting location, they can also collect depth data and temperature data. But as soon as you start asking the tag to collect more data, they A, get more expensive, and B, they don't last as long. So again, it's a question as to what are you most interested in, and that'll help you decide how you would program the tag. And because these tags, you want to have that antenna out of the surface, they're always attached to the shark's dorsal fin. And so how do we tag sharks? In an ideal world, the shark is in the water the entire time that we're tagging sharks. But because the programs that we're using to tag sharks here in Alaska, these aren't shark-specific programs. These are programs that are maybe studying salmon, and we happen to catch a shark. So unfortunately, we can't keep the shark in the water. This is totally opportunistic tagging. So there are a few things that we do to try to make it as quick and easy and as stress-free for the shark as possible. So the first thing we want to do is, because we're not keeping the shark in the water, we try to put a hose into the shark's mouth, and that keeps the water flowing over their gills. So salmon sharks are what are known as ram ventilators, which means that they have to swim constantly to breathe. You might have seen images of sharks resting on the sand, and it looks like they're taking gulps. Those sharks have the ability to push water over their gills. Salmon sharks don't. They have to be swimming with their mouth open to force water over their gills to breathe. So while they're out of the water, we want to put that hose in their mouth to force water over their gills during the tagging process. And then you can see here that we've got a salmon shark on deck, and she's got a towel over her face. So usually when we get a shark on the deck, the towel it puts them kind of into like a sensory overload almost, where they just kind of chill out for a second. And so we try to do that so that they calm down, so that we can focus on getting the tags in and getting the shark back into the water as soon as possible. So here's another shark. You can see the towel over its face. The tag's about to go in, and as soon as those tags are in, that shark is back in the water. And so what can we learn from tagging sharks? I mentioned a few things. So we can learn about their migration patterns, and that's really nice because these sharks are covering incredible distances. So we don't see what they're doing all the time. We tend to see them when they're in coastal waters close to shore. And so these tags can give us information about the entire year, which is pretty incredible. And it can also tell us about their habitat use and preferences. So do these sharks prefer to be in coastal waters? Do they prefer to be in oceanic high seas waters? These are the kinds of things that we can learn. And they also tell us about site fidelity, and site fidelity just means, are these sharks coming back to certain places repeatedly? And if so, why might they be visiting those places year after year? It also shows us their overlap with fisheries or protected areas. And finally, while usually the main objective is to get tags, when we have a shark on the deck, it also gives us an opportunity to collect other data. So we can collect length information. We can also take a tissue sample for genetic analysis. Sometimes we'll take a little bit of their muscle so that we can analyze it. So we, while we have a shark on the deck, we want to try to get as much information from it as possible. And so I've talked a lot about salmon sharks. Now I want to talk about what research do we actually do in Alaska on salmon sharks. And hopefully you all can see that video. I mentioned that salmon sharks are warm-blooded sharks. They're very energetic. This is a shark that came onto the deck, and as you can see, it's not very easy to tag them when they are obviously not very happy about being out on the deck. And I also mentioned that the surveys where we catch these sharks, these are not shark surveys. These are usually salmon surveys, and we just tend to run into sharks every once in a while when we're out doing these surveys. So I just put a photo up here in the top left of one of the vessels that we use for our salmon surveys. And here in this top right, you can see the net that we use. This is a survey for juvenile salmon in the northern Bering Sea. And so this net will fish the upper 60 feet of the water column, and we're looking for juvenile salmon, but once or twice a year, we might get lucky and we pull up a salmon shark. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that the Bering Sea is a really exciting place to study sharks and salmon sharks. And that's because if you look at this map, I've plotted the locations of salmon sharks that were caught in salmon surveys in the Bering Sea. And those dots are colored by the shark's sex. So male sharks are shown in purple, female sharks are shown in pink, and unknown sex are shown in gray. And I hope that it's pretty obvious to everyone that most of the sharks that we're encountering in the Bering Sea are males. And if you remember what I mentioned a few slides ago about the tagging studies that they've done in Alaska, all of those tagged sharks were females. So the Bering Sea gives us a place where we can access this part of the salmon shark population that hasn't really been studied. So since we're running into these sharks during these surveys, we want to take advantage of that opportunity, and we want to tag sharks if we catch them on these surveys. And like I said, some years we catch one, some years we catch none, some years we catch two, and that's a big year. So they're not guaranteed. So far we've tagged 3 sharks, 3 male sharks. Shark A here in the top, in the top, and this shark, he only had a PSAT, so that archival tag that was attached to him for a year, collected depth, temperature, and light information, and then off he went. And then Shark B and Shark C, they each had 2 tags, so they carried that that dorsal fin tag that transmits locations for 3 years, and then they were also tagged with the archival tag that collected depth and temperature data for a year. And so I wanted to show you what the data from these tags looks like. So these are the tracks from Shark A. And if you'll remember, Shark A didn't have a spot tag, but what we can do is we can use the depth, the temperature, and those tags also collect light level. And you can use those 3 components to create a map of where these sharks are. And so each of these dots is where that shark was. It's 1 location per day. So the shark was tagged just west of Nunavak Island in August. And then shortly right after being tagged, he swam south and he went across the North Pacific. And by November, he was off the coast of the Western US. And he basically stayed off the coast of the Western US for the entire winter. He got pretty offshore, and then he ended up getting pretty close to California in April and March, and then headed up north. And you can see he hung around this area for quite a while. And then in July, he did almost a straight shot back to the Bering Sea, where he arrived in August of 2017. And then his tag popped off just north of St. Lawrence. So it was pretty interesting to me that this shark swam from the Bering Sea and overwintered off the coast of California and then returned to the Bering Sea. To me, that migration pattern was pretty similar to what we saw in the females who spent their summers here in the Gulf of Alaska, but then went down to California for the winter. And it was also interesting to me that the salmon shark returned to the Bering Sea in August, which is after most of our the majority of our salmon runs have started to peter out. And if we sum the distances between each of the locations, this shark swam about 11,700 miles in that 1 year. And that sounds impressive already, but that's only the distance between the locations at the surface. So that doesn't account for any of the swimming that the shark is doing underwater. And they're doing a lot of swimming underwater as well. So this is the record for the entire year of the shark's depth and its temperature. And so each location, or sorry, each dot here is a depth, and it is colored by the temperature at that depth. So these warmer reds and oranges, those are warmer sea surface temperatures. I'm sorry, it's in Celsius, but 18 is about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And 4, I think, is about 42, but don't quote me on that. The Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion is tough, but the cool thing is that these sharks are moving throughout the water column. They spend a lot of time at the surface, as you can see from all of these points at the 0 meter line, but then they're also going down up to 500 meters. And one of the cool things was this period of time between about January and February where the shark did not come to the surface at all. And you can see that about 100 meters of depth, the water temperature was really warm, about 64, 65 degrees. So to me, that I wonder if, if that's the extent of how much of where it gets too warm for them. Typically, based on previous tagging data from those females, the sharks tend to stay in about 4 to 14 degrees Celsius. So this is when we see the shark doing quite a bit deeper dives, maybe to escape this warmer surface water. And now this is Shark B's migration track. So Shark B actually had the satellite transmitting tag on its dorsal fin. So these are actual locations that's the tag transmitted when the shark was at the surface. And like I said, they're coming to the surface quite often. So it gives us a really good picture of what they're doing throughout the year. And off the bat, you'll see that Shark B's migration is very different from Shark A's. So unlike Shark A, who went to California, Shark B spent its entire time in the Bering Sea and in the North Pacific. So Shark B was tagged up here in September, and down he went, and he spent a little bit of time. Hopefully you can see on this map that there's this underwater feature here that's part of the Emperor Seamount chain that goes all the way down to Hawaii. He spent quite a bit of time here, and then he crossed the Pacific and spent a bit of winter just roaming around this area. And then it looked like he was going to go back to the Seamount, but then in June he took a sharp turn north, and he was back around the Aleutians in July and back to the Bering Sea in August. So quite different from Shark A. He swam just a little bit less at 10,300 miles, but still very impressive. And because this is the satellite transmitting tag, these are just the tracks from his first year. The next slide is going to be a video where I've made a video of his tracks from his first year and the tracks from his second year, so that you can see that their migration isn't the same year to year. So hopefully you can see that animation, and each different color is a different month. And you can see that this region, that Emperor Seamount region, the shark did visit that area in both years. But in that first year, he remained in the North Pacific. But in year 2, he made repeat visits between the Emperor Seamount chain and the Bering Sea shelf, and then back north to the Bering Sea. So
Sabrina, this is Gay. We have 3 callers, and so they don't have the benefit necessarily, because I don't know the locations of 2 of them, but they don't have the benefit of watching. When you say the Emperor Seamount, it looks like it's, if you went to ADAC and you went straight down off, what would that be? Sort of
Yeah,
Japan?
if you looked at the longitude on the bottom, it's about maybe 170 and then 40. So 170 on the bottom and 40 on the left axis. Actually, I can go back. If they only have the presentation, that's seamount area.
No, these guys wouldn't have, there's some people just joined, so they won't be able to catch it in time, but just sort of that it went way down and kind of off of almost straight line from ADAC down to Japan, pretty far down into the Pacific.
Yeah, pretty far down, kind of in the middle of nowhere in the ocean. But seamounts are a pretty cool area. They tend to have these unique water conditions. They're like good for upwelling. So fish tend to congregate around those areas. So they might be a place that has really good food availability for these sharks. But the point that I wanted to make for the callers on the line is that these sharks one shark isn't doing the same thing year to year. And even from one year to the next, they have different migration patterns. But with just those 2 years of data, we can see that there might be some areas like the Emperor Seamount chain, that underwater feature. It's kind of like an underwater mountain ridge, and the Bering Sea are two places that they do return to. And so, yeah, just to summarize that, salmon sharks, these two sharks, Shark A and Shark B, they were tagged in pretty close in the northern Bering Sea, but they did completely different things. One shark shot straight across the Pacific to California, while the other one hung out in the North Pacific and then went up and down to the Bering Sea. And both sharks spent a lot of time at the surface, but they also move throughout the water column down to 1,500 feet or more. And the Bering Sea and the Emperor Seamount chain, like I mentioned, those two areas seem to be places that they're visiting year to year. And I don't have it on here, but Shark B, he's in his third year of data collection. So I'm getting a little nervous that any day now the battery on his tag is going to die and I won't be able to keep track of him. But even in his third year, he still went to that same region by the Emperor Seamount and then back to the Bering Sea. And then I've mentioned that we had a third shark tag, Shark C. He's my problem shark because he, since December, has decided that he doesn't want to come up. So I haven't gotten a location from him since December. So I'm hoping that he'll come up soon so that I can see where he is. And then I wanted to talk a little bit of what some of the things that we're going to keep doing in the future. So, I have tags, but I can't be out on every survey that goes out and samples in the ocean. So what I do is, if I know that there's research projects that are going to be sampling in the ocean where they may encounter sharks, I will send them my tags. And so I'm going to keep doing that. And one of the surveys that it just happened in February and March, and it's actually still going on now, is this International Year of the Salmon survey. And this figure here shows a map of the sampling area for this survey. And you can see that it's sampling from Japan across the North Pacific to the coast of Canada. And so I put tags on each of those vessels. So if they caught a shark, we were going to deploy some tags. And luckily, 2 of those boats caught sharks. So I was on one of them, which was great because I hadn't gotten to tag my own shark in a long time. And so we tagged a shark just off about 300 miles off the coast of Oregon. You can see that she was tagged. It was a lady shark. She was tagged March 4th. And the last time she came to the surface was April 6th. And so each of those dots is when her fin was at the surface long enough to send a location. And if we just take the 2 points here, her first location and her last location, she swam about 860 miles, so about 30 miles a day. And she's off the coast of Southern California right now. So if she's doing what all the other female sharks do, I expect that in the next month or so, she's going to whip around and start coming up north to Alaska. But those female sharks were tagged 20 years ago. So I'm curious to see if there's going to be any difference in timing in their migration. And then the second shark that was tagged as part of this research effort was a male shark. And this shark was tagged about 300 miles south of Dutch Harbor. And so he was tagged on March 23rd, and his last location was actually today. So right before the presentation, I jumped onto the tag manufacturer's portal, and I just wanted to check if he had transmitted, and he had. So he's coming up to the surface. Here on the map, if you have it in front of you, you can see that underwater feature that I was mentioning, the Emperor Seamount chain. And this shark has traveled about 570 miles since he was tagged. So they are pretty incredible swimmers, covering a lot of ground. And the other thing that we want to do is well, one of the boats on this survey was a Russian vessel. And I gave them 4 sets of tags to take with them back to Russia. The Russians do a lot of pink salmon surveys off the Kamchatka Peninsula. So if you can see my cursor, that's up here. And they tend to catch lots and lots of salmon sharks. And they tend to catch males and females and small sharks and big sharks. So I'm hoping that they can go out and do their surveys this summer and put those tags out for me, because again, I'm in a position where I can't go out on every survey. I can't tag all the sharks that I have tags for. So collaboration is really important. And finally, one of the things that I'm also involved in is using genetics to see if we can tell salmon sharks from the Western North Pacific apart from salmon sharks in the Eastern North Pacific. So that's a project that involves some Canadian collaborators and some Russian collaborators as well. And so the genetic information and the tag information will hopefully shed some light on whether these shark populations in the North Pacific are actually 2 separate stocks, or are they sharks that actually mix at some point that we don't know. And so I'm glad that you're all here, because I need your help. Like I said, I can't be everywhere. So what I ask is that if you're out fishing, commercial fishing, recreational fishing, if you're out on the boat and you see a shark, I would love it if you could let me know about it. I have folks post these flyers for me in Nome. My contact information is on there. And you can also call Jen Bell over at the Nome Fish and Game office. And you can also report a sighting to me through Facebook Messenger. So we have a Facebook page. It's called The Undersea World of Salmon and Sharks. And if you want to see updated tracks from the sharks that we tagged, there's now 5 of them. We post on that Facebook page really regularly. So if you want to keep up with where the sharks are, I suggest you follow us. And you can also contact me through there. While I have everybody here, one of the things that I'm really interested in is whether the shark is a male or a female. So I just wanted to point out that if you do see a shark and you do get to see its underside, you're looking at these fins close to its tail. And those are its claspers, so the male appendage is there. So it's really easy to tell sharks apart, male and female sharks apart. If you do come across a shark, do take some pictures and please let me know where you saw it. And finally, if there are any teachers out there that are interested in teaming up, I would love to get classrooms involved. And if there are students that would be interested in naming a shark and following its travels, please contact me. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening. And though I'm the one giving this presentation, there's a lot of people that are involved in this from NOAA and Fish and Game and UAF. Here's a shark coming in that salmon trawl net. And it goes. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. That was really interesting. I have a lot of questions myself, honestly. But first off, what we do in Strait Science is this is a good time while you're trying to figure out your question is give Sabrina some love. And it was extra love today because we had some excitement with youthful loud music players. So God bless them. We learned a lot of new buttons. So thank you, Sabrina. You persevered and gave a great presentation. So thank you so much for that. And we do already have some questions in the chat, but we have callers on. And so callers get priority at Strait Science because it's really hard to be any kind of caller on any kind of Zoom call. So are there any questions from the callers? If not, we'll give you a minute. But know that if you callers that are on at any time, feel free to speak up and ask your question, and we will give you guys priority. Everybody else can wait. It's hard to be a caller. Two are in Alaska.
Gabe,
Go ahead.
Gabe, this is Rafaela. I would have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rafaela.
So I'm curious about, with respect to the stomach content. So is there any, because they're so narrow, defined of not eating mammalian. Now, if we look at, killer whales, we do know that they, you can have your salmon eating ones, you can have your, shark or elasmobranch favoring, killer whale and then the marine mammal eater. Is there a possibility for that actually there could be prey switching happening for salmon sharks, or are their teeth not made for it, or is there a particular reason? Just curious.
Yeah.
Could they become a marine mammal eater?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Their teeth and their mouths are actually, let me see if I can, well, let me go back and see if I can find a mouth, but the way that their mouth is, their shape and their teeth aren't really built for like a great white shark's teeth for going into marine mammals. So their teeth are more for grabbing something, ripping it in half and then eating it. But marine mammal contents haven't been found in the shark stomachs that they've looked at, but that's not to say that they don't eat them. It just happens that the ones that they've looked at didn't have them in there. And in terms of prey switching, I think that salmon sharks do a lot of prey switching. I think that they switch to whatever is most abundant and easy to catch. And in the summer, that tends to be salmon. And in the fall and winter, it's whatever they can get, whatever is easy to catch. So I won't say never eating marine mammals because, we haven't done a ton of diet studies. There's been a few in the 60s and then the two that I showed during the presentation. So yeah, there's still a lot to learn. The woman that I mentioned that's doing research in Oregon, she's also getting muscle samples to look at stable isotopes. And so when you look inside a salmon shark's stomach, you're seeing what it ate very recently. But when you look at when you analyze their muscle, you can see what they maybe ate 3 months ago. And so she's going to look to see if they're what's recorded in their muscle and if that's different from what she's seeing in their stomach. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you. And can I just follow this one up? So Gay and local observers, hunters in community. So we have actually documented some injuries to pinnipeds that, were looked at by, shark experts, and there was no doubt about them. So we saw flipper amputations, and circular bite marks, and we're talking northern phocetes now. So we're talking, ring seals, we're talking bearded seals. So my question for you is, what shark would that then be? For the Alaskan, the northern waters? Thank you. That was my last question.
Yeah, great question. I have two answers for that. So one is an unlikely response, which surprised me. They could be Pacific sleeper sharks, which when you think of a Pacific sleeper shark, I actually have a picture of one for folks who aren't familiar. This is a Pacific sleeper shark here on the left. They are, they're big, they're kind of sluggish. When you look at them, you're like, that thing can't move very fast. But you can see in this picture that this shark has an archival tag, and it's about to be released. And when they've looked at these archival tags and when they've looked at the depth data, these sharks are swimming up and down throughout the water column. So they're doing things that we did not think that these sharks would do. And they've actually these sharks, when they've looked in their stomachs, they do have marine mammal pieces. Now, whether those are attacks on live mammals or whether those are ones that they're scavenging on, it's hard to say. The other obvious answer is that just because the satellite tags that I showed in the presentation earlier on the white sharks didn't show them coming up here, they have come up here. There are records of white sharks off the Russian coast, and there's anecdotal reports of white sharks in the Bering Sea. And I don't think that a salmon shark would go after a big marine mammal just because their mouths and their teeth aren't really cut out for it.
Super, thank you very much.
So, and just a follow up to that. Thank you, Rafaela. That was one of my questions. Like, what would it be? But for the anecdotal in the Bering Sea, are you including the 1979 August report from a fisherman who actually got one up on deck, sliced it open, and had a chunks of stellar sea lion fall out?
Was that the white shark?
Yeah, it was a white shark.
Mm. If
I
it
can
was
send you that.
included
It's in a
paper,
compilation paper.
yeah, if it was in that paper, yeah, that's the one that that had the.
Okay.
I just didn't remember the year.
Yeah, 1979, and we have had in this region expert observers watch things like a stellar sea lion bull, so that's about 12 to 1,500 pounds, be hit from below, have a large shark bite one of its arms, as it was described, and then both went underwater, and only blood came to the surface, and there was no resurfacing of any animal. Very good view, very good description. Seems like the MO, but of course we don't have any anything to sort of other than expert witness. But there was concern for that, and as we see stellar sea lions move into the region, they've been here, but they're moving north, and there are more of them staying longer, coming earlier, that sort of thing. So I would think caribou bring wolves. Maybe these sharks are these bigger sharks than your salmon shark, or bigger teeth first cousin, might be in the mix. So it'll be interesting when you find that one.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that's another great segue for me to plug. Yeah, reporting observations, and if you can take video, take photos, so that we can get them from anecdotes to actually confirmed observations. And yeah, another reason why we need to have these observations, because, you know, as waters get warmer, as prey that we aren't used to seeing in the numbers that we're seeing now, are sharks going to begin, especially these other warm-blooded sharks like makos and great whites, are we going to start seeing them in our waters? I had a video, but I took it out of a thresher shark, which is I don't know if folks are familiar with thresher sharks. They look like a shark, but they have a tail that's as long as its body, and these are typically more tropically associated sharks, but they caught one in the Gulf of Alaska. So was that just a vagrant that happened to come up, or is this a shark species that is starting to inch its way as waters get warmer, or in these years of these marine blobs? So yeah, it's good to have a baseline of what should be here, and what's common, and what's just to see if things are changing.
Right. All right. Anyone else have questions? There's questions in the chat. What explains the trough between the Peter, maybe you better ask this question if you're still on. What explains the trough between the two white sharks?
Sorry, that was a very specific question on one graph that was shown, looking at the distribution between whites, makos, and salmon sharks.
Okay.
And I was just curious.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, they have this very curious bimodal distribution of the temperatures that they're in. It was all the way at the beginning, so it's going to take me a second.
It was quite a way at the beginning. Sorry, I was kind of.
No, that's okay.
I made a number of comments in the chat, kind of chronologically. So exactly that one.
Yeah, this one. So I'm going to hazard a guess, because I am not a white shark expert. But white sharks, they do these migrations. They come to the coast, and then they tend to visit what's called the White Shark Cafe, which is out here. So I'm wondering if one peak is the waters maybe closer, maybe out here in the White Shark Cafe, what we're seeing in the middle is while they're transiting, and then another peak when they're hanging out closer to the coast. That's just a guess of why, because it is a very unique distribution for that temperature.
Okay, so a much more important question. What on earth is a white shark cafe?
So they've tagged a lot of sharks off the coast of California, and all these sharks, the sharks that they have tagged, they all go to this one area in the middle of the ocean, and they don't know why these sharks are going out there. So one of the really interesting things about sharks is that everybody loves sharks. At some point in your life, you were probably really obsessed with sharks because they're awesome. But we don't know that much about them for them being these like charismatic megafauna. And even something like a great white that everybody, if you ask anybody, they know what a great white is. We still don't know where they mate. We still don't know where they give birth. And this is a pretty visible predator. So yeah, the White Shark Cafe is an area in the middle of the ocean where these white sharks end up meeting up, and they don't know why they go there. I just read an article that they developed these cameras. So basically kind of like the dorsal fin tag, that clips onto their dorsal fin, but it's a camera because they want to know, are they going out there because there's some great ocean buffet, or are they going out there to mate? So yeah, it's another mystery.
All right. And someone asked if they were aggressive. Salmon sharks, are they aggressive?
You know, I think like they're not, like I said, because they are the prey that they tend to eat are fish and squid. I don't think they would really be interested in something, you know, these sharks are 6 to 7 feet. So they're a little bit taller than, you know, an average male. So I don't think they're super interested in going after someone like us. And there's also not a lot of us swimming in the ocean up here. So I don't think that we'd really have the opportunity to encounter them. So I wouldn't worry.
Right. So someone actually described, I said, oh, I don't know about salmon shark. They said, salmon shark. If a salmon shark tried to eat a stellar sea lion, they'd have to tie that stellar sea lion down, you know,
yeah,
and then give it like a day, and that salmon shark, it'd be horrible. But I get the idea that they're probably not like the crushing injuries of a great white shark, more like that little teeth, little mouth, pointy mouth. So maybe something for a, what's the largest prey item that goes into a salmon shark's belly? Like how big a fish or how big a squid?
They, I would say probably the largest thing that they're eating are immature Chinook salmon. So over, let's say 600 millimeters. So gosh, I can't do the conversion. 2.5 feet.
Bigger than a bread box.
Bigger than a bread box. That's a really interesting, you know, Chinook salmon have very infrequently been found in salmon shark stomachs. I mentioned that they did some diet work in the 60s, and they found very, very little Chinook. But a professor at UAF has tagged some immature Chinook salmon with the same tags that we put out on the sharks. So those tags that are measuring depth and temperature and light. And a lot of his Chinook salmon got eaten by salmon sharks. And Chinook salmon are big and they're girthy. So I would say that that's probably a big prey item for a salmon shark. And it's really interesting because a lot of the king salmon were eaten by a number of different predators. So some of them were eaten by marine mammals, some of them by salmon sharks, and then others were eaten by cold-blooded fish. And it's really interesting because it's, again, the ability of these salmon sharks to have that elevated body temperature relative to their environment. So the tag, when the shark eats the Chinook salmon that's tagged, it's swallowing the tag, and the tag is still working. So it's measuring the stomach temperature of the shark. And so we can tell that that's the salmon shark because its body temperature, it's about 75 degrees, but a marine mammal would have a much higher body temperature. And then these cold-blooded ectothermic fish have body temperatures that are more similar to the water temperature of the water that they're in.
Right. I was just thinking some of the injuries, to if you had a ring seal pop, they're like the size of a snowshoe hare. So, I would think that's something in the realm. Interesting.
Yeah, and maybe when they're young too, and maybe a little naive.
Right. Another question. Any theories on why the annual migrations aren't the same? Good question.
That's a great question. I wish I had the answer. That migration in the first year where it kind of, was, going across the ocean and then did a few loops in the middle of the North Pacific. When I saw that, I just thought, I wonder if it keyed in on some food, maybe a school of pink salmon out in the ocean and just followed it because it was good eating. I don't really know. I was wondering if because the timing of when they came back to that Emperor Seamount chain, and because he kept going back year to year, that started getting my gears going with, gosh, is he going out there to meet up with some female sharks that are from the western side of the Pacific? I don't really know. It's all speculation, but it is really interesting that his migration in the third year, so this current year, was very similar to his second year, where he just went between that Emperor Seamount chain region, then up to the Bering Sea, then back down to the Seamount, and then back up to the Bering Sea. So yeah, I don't really know why he's doing that. Right.
All right. Any other questions for Sabrina? You're in Anchorage. Are you at all, do you ever know the Stellar Sea Lion people with the ADFG? Stellar Sea Lion program?
The only oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say the only Stellar Sea Lion folk that I knew were from the Sea Life Center, but they turned into Pacific Sleeper Shark people.
Well, one of the things, they have a branding program, and one of the things that we're noticing now that we're getting people more interested in the brands, and I guess we should be doing a straight science, but more interested in the brands, is that they never thought of Stellar Sea Lions round tripping. So as you showed, really the path is the same. They're coming in and they're going
incredible
by Dutch Harbor. It's a real highway, I would imagine. And they're going round tripping to Juneau. Juneau in the summer, same animal in Gamble in December, back down in Juneau. I mean, it really follows. It's just like this little path, although it's not going down to California. It's going into pulling a little bit more of a northern turn and going into Juneau. But it's impressive that the links to some of these animals. We didn't know that they were doing these kind of things. So very interesting work you're doing. Holy cow! Thank you so much.
It's super exciting. Yeah, I feel super lucky to be a part of it. And the shark world in Alaska is small, and I feel really lucky to be a part of it.
Well, we're glad you're here, because I think we're going to see more and probably have a lot more questions. And I hope you come back next year with the rest of the story on your 2 so far caught from
just last month
for 2022, just last month, with the update from tonight. I did see your flyers at the store, and I think they're around, so that's really great. And if we hear of salmon sharks, we see of any, we'll be sure to take a picture. And Jen Bell, if you're still on, we're going to be giving you a call and some. Yeah, Jen, you're on. We're going to be calling Jen Bell at ADFG, and that's 443-2271. Is that right, Jen?
5186. I don't know. 5167. I don't know.
Okay.
Just stop by the office. It'd be easier.
All right, we'll bring the pictures. So, well, if no more questions.
5167.
5167. All right. Well done. Yeah, that the 2271 will just get you at the front desk. So, any other questions? Just a terrific presentation, and really interesting to see where your sharks are going. So
yeah, thanks so much for having
shark
me.
Bites on. Yeah, you bet. We'll be looking for shark bites on marine mammals, and see what you get in the stomachs of some of your salmon sharks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if folks have any questions that they didn't get to ask tonight, they can email me and I'd be happy to talk sharks anytime.
There's a number of seabird people. I just saw 2 seabird people were on this call. And do salmon sharks have they ever plucked a bird from the sitting on the surface? Do they do any of
Gosh,
that?
not that I know of. The tiger sharks tend to do that quite a bit to fledgling albatross.
Okay.
Yeah, in the tropics. It's not, I've seen a few videos. It makes me really sad because these little birds are just trying to fly and they hit the water and there's sharks waiting for them at the bottom. So
Walrus do it here. They'll take birds
Oh,
as they're
wow.
flopping into off the cliff. Yeah. Just
yeah.
suck them
But
down.
then stellar sea eagles will pick off small coral sharks in Australia. So maybe it's all even
It's a
Steven
rough
in the end.
world. It's a rough world. It's a rough world out there. All right. Well, Sabrina, if you want to stay on the line for 1 second, and
Sure.
we'll say thank you. Next week is going to be the Oculus Glider project, which is getting off the ground, and it should be out of Nome, and that will be an underwater robot traveling the seas to get temperature and other information. So with that, I would say thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week.